Erica, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. It's interesting because I reached out to you for some insight into, what we were building and just kind of from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also, given your just deep expertise in product marketing and product management and these sort of things. And then I realized that we had a lot of folks in common. I actually reached out to Aaron and we're going to be catching up soon because I hadn't talked to him in a while. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show, and then also just all the insight and willingness to help entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as I am sitting here real on vacation, I still want to kind of share some knowledge, and it's just good to connect. And I think there's a lot of people that can learn from you and learn from me.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you take a quick second to kind of give us a brief snapshot into your career, but specifically what inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
I have been an entrepreneur, I think, since birth. I had a babysitting business and all sorts of other things early on. What inspired me was actually a real world problem that I had. So I owned a virtual real estate company for the first 10 years of my career. And it was the early days. YouTube forums were really hot, blogging. Social was still kind of early. If anything, Facebook had barely been launched. And I was doing all of this kind of marketing blast online, but it took me so much time to go and answer all this information and comment and engage with people. When I figured out how to do it, it was a huge lead gen, but it just time sucked. Yeah. So that problem space, I said, if there was a way that I could distribute information, but even more so aggregate back all of those responses and like have a console to do that, I would pay money for that. And that was the birth of Expion, my bootstrap startup. And so it really came from me thinking about a personal business problem and trying to solve that instead of just making up some sort of thing. So that was really how I launched my foray into tech. And that was back in 2009. So it's been a while ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. And it came from an entrepreneurial endeavor in the real estate space.
It did, yes. So very heavy into marketing, obviously selling things, keeping up with what I didn't know at the time was really a CRM. I used to use an old tool called Top Agent. So I would have tasks every day, follow up with this person, project management of trying to close out deals. And so I was touching tech in a lot of different capacities, but I didn't apply it necessarily into somebody else's business use case. It was driving my own business. And I think that experience actually brings me a really unique viewpoint of building products now. And I've done everything from bootstrap to zero to when I left Meltwater, we were over 400 million in revenue, have done some sunsets of tools along the way, have done thousands of customer migrations. And so I've hit everything along the way, but it really always comes from the empathy of the person or the team of people trying to make their lives easier. And I think that's what technology really can unlock in a B2B capacity. That's my experience. That's the viewpoint I sit from. So I can get dirty in the tech, but I really want to sit in the user's seat and think about, give them an hour extra a day. Let them be able to spend more time with their family, walk their dog at lunch. Don't sit there stuck in a spreadsheet. And so if we can find optimizations for, people doing work, that's really what gets me excited.
That really sort of hits home specifically as a early stage startup or, that early founder trying to get those first set of customers, right? I was just reading a blog post about, finding product market fit. We've been talking about that for quite a long time. What would you say is some advice that you would give founders on, getting those first customers? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about what the MVP really looks like, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is not for the faint of heart. If you have an idea, first and foremost, especially if you're trying to get seed money or bootstrap it yourself, don't go build something and then just try to find people to buy it or to use it. Really take a little bit of a step back, even if it's rough sketches, or get yourself handy with Figma, create some sort of rough prototypes and start to put it in front of people. Even you and I talked about it. We reached out and you said, all right, I've got some ideas about this new thing I'm coming up with. And all right, let's poke at it together. So find people like myself, find industry experts, reach out to them. LinkedIn obviously is a huge networking capability for everybody, but you have to be bold enough to go and ask for that advice. And I also think the humility of being a founder is so important, because if you have this idea and I call it like an ego monger. If you're so stuck that your idea is like the next big thing, if you're hearing from all of these different outside inputs that it's not really going to solve any real problem, don't invest in it. You need to pivot. You need to think differently. So I've seen founders get really stuck where they think this is the thing and not take that feedback. And that's right there. That's death of a startup. So you have to be agile. You have to move. But I really think before you start putting, dollars in code, you have to really do some market research first.
Got it. We talk a lot about that MVP. When can a founder consider start to build that, and how does that sort of relate to what you just mentioned earlier, those early conversations? Would you consider the MVP those Figma designs, or more of a functional product?
I think it depends on what you're trying to build. I mean, right now, there's AI startup companies that are happening that have 0 lines of code that just have launched and gotten hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. That's like an intellectual IP startup. That's a bit different. So in that case, the Figma or the overview of kind of what the business initiatives could be might make sense. I think if you're selling or trying to get those first couple of customers to an MVP, we didn't charge our first customer. Our very first customer literally was a feedback engine to say, does this make sense? Great, build it. Did it work as you expected? What would be next? What would you see as the next step of what you would like to be able to accomplish? So we worked very hand in hand with, I guess you would even call them alpha customers, soon to be paying customers at some point in time. But I think the MVP is when you get that aha moment from that group that you're working with, and they go, this just saved me, 5 hours a week. This just did that. Then you need to really focus in on those types of personas. We can throw around a ton of acronyms if we want to. The ideal customer, ICPs. But you want to then go and network and find others that are similar to them. Because if you find somebody too different, your MVP is not going to match their expectation. So it's really about focusing. And then from there, once you start to get some momentum, you can broaden the scope of what you've got. But don't overcomplicate an MVP. It's okay for it not to be, can I swear on here?
Absolutely.
It's okay I call it minimum viable shit. It might not be all the way there, but it's getting there as it's a journey to a starting point. And you'll see it in people's eyes and their responses that they go, oh, this is killer. That's that nugget moment when I've gotten good enough that I can start to charge money for this and then build upon it.
And for the founders out there, is it okay that you provide something early on that maybe they don't have that reaction to, and then iterate on that, or is it generally, if you don't get that reaction, early on, then maybe you're not onto something?
I think it's interesting being a founder and then also being a product leader. You have in your mind what you want the big picture to ultimately be, but that reality of the person who can't see that end game or that big picture is you need to help guide them towards that journey. And so let's say I call it the 20-mile path, right? You've gotten them to mile number 2, but they really are going to find value at mile number 5. It's okay to keep going, but don't try to build all the way to the 20-mile marker. Because the 15 in between might be wrong. So small steps. Threads is a prime example of this, that just launched a couple days ago. Real-time scenario here. They have properly admitted that they are doing a Twitter killer. It is not good enough yet, but it's something. It's a starting point. Now that's a really big example of an MVP. But it's still showing that they're humble enough to say, we're not all the way there, but stick with us and give us feedback and we'll keep building.
Yeah, and it's easy, I think. Well, I don't know. I say that uh, hesitantly just because I don't know the actual, sort of underpinnings of what's going on. But like, I think for an organization like Instagram or Meta or whatever,
Meta,
Facebook,
yeah,
whatever we,
whatever name today.
yeah, whatever they write, I think it's easier to absorb a failure or go through that iterative process versus like a bootstrap, startup where, or even just an early stage where, they don't have the resources to burn something through a year, and that could be, you know, their existence
Right.
as founders, right? Like a lot of the time, I think, like you're worried about, paying your bills and, all those things, right? As an entrepreneur. So I think that's one thing that comes to mind, or just for the audience to say, hey, you know what, we get that, right? We understand that there's a distinction there, but that process of putting it out there and iterating on it, I think that's one of the things that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook has done quite well that I've observed. I mean, think about how many products they put out there that didn't take off, but they took that chance, right?
Yeah, and I don't, obviously that's not a good example of bootstrapping something compared to, Meta being able to completely launch something else that's all opposite directions for them. But it does, it's that same inspiration that it shows that they're willing to take the risk. And that's why earlier I said, don't put, if you've got $50,000 in personal net worth and you're going to put all $50,000 on the line for a startup and you don't have even any validation, that's a bad move, right? So, small investments, even trying to get some seed stage, is really much smarter. We literally started with, I think it was around $40,000, and that was mostly all geared towards uh, AWS. So being able to get some servers spun up. We had a couple of licensing packages that we needed to get for code and some QA processes. But you have to be very methodical of how you spend your money. And so I think, taking away from the Instagram and the Threads conversation, if you are one of those bootstrapped or you're in that seed stage of founding a company, really be thoughtful of where the money is going. Don't start with marketing out there for something that doesn't even exist yet.
It was interesting because that really hit home for me. My first web startup was a social network for travel back in 2005. And I had no money. I was I just graduated undergrad and was trying to figure out what the heck to do. And so I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I got this idea, like, and my mom, this is just how supportive she is. She was like, all right, I'll call you back. She took out a second mortgage on her home to
Wow.
give me money to invest in this startup. And then my co-founder, between the both of us, I think we probably invested somewhere a little under $200,000 at that time. And we did it completely the wrong way. We locked ourselves in a hotel room in Atlanta, Georgia, for a couple of days and wrote out every feature and that we thought was cool. Then ship that PRD or whatever to a outsourced development shop, and we built it, and then we put it out in the market, and no one cared. Right, for 3 years, no one cared,
Yeah.
and I was living on my dad's couch and for a bit and all this stuff. So I totally get it, and it's interesting because I still, after all this time, have struggled with trying to figure out what that balance is. You know, as many times as I've done the startup thing, I always still feel like, oh crap, maybe we didn't, maybe we launched a little too early, or we didn't, or we started building, I should say, a little too early, to your point, right? Those sort of things. And you just hear so many sort of different stories of the way that founders approach things, and you go, oh boy, what is it? Do I need some divine intervention sometimes, some little luck, right? And maybe it is, maybe there's a little bit of that, right?
I think there's, I mean, what's the percentage? It's like 99. 0.8% of startups fail. Like, I don't know if that's the right number. I'm just coming up with it. But it takes guts. It really does take guts, and you have to dig in. I mean, I remember the hours, and sort of the joke was back in XP on my startup, I was the one with the least technical experience, but yet I've done every job in the company except for coding. So I think, you're sleeping on your dad's couch, you're writing up PRDs, you're trying to figure out, is this product good? I'm sure you and your co-founder back then were probably, your own best QA. You're kicking it. That's not right. Here's feedback. You really were playing product. You were playing go to market. You're just spinning all of these plates. And that's the one thing I see with a lot of the founders. And I say startup, and startup could mean you've hit 5 million in revenue. You still don't know what you're doing. You don't have the right go-to-market motion. You're not saying the right words that people who are, not in it every day with you would understand. People will look at a website you spun up and the terminology is just foreign to them. That's the problem they have, but your words don't match the problem in their brain. So it really is interesting to think about when you start spending money on building, but also how do you form all of the other pieces around launching a product so that it does start to get traction. So did you have experience with trying to spin all of those plates, or was that just me in our basement for our startup?
No, totally resonates also because I'm non-technical, and so having to do everything multiple times, and that particular startup was my first one, but I had no point of reference to. The only other thing that was similar or in that world of online communities, of course, Facebook had just launched the year before, and then of course there was MySpace and Friendster and stuff. But we were just basically copying everything that Facebook would do, and then put a travel, twist to the functionality. And so, in retrospect, I look back and I go, "What were you doing, George?" But but you live and you learn, right? Question, what would you say are the most challenging aspects of entrepreneurship, and any tips that you would give founders around trying your best to overcome those things? And you mentioned it really takes courage, right? And for me, yes, there's the tactical stuff in the day-to-day, but for me, the most challenging that I've experienced myself, but then also just talking to other founders, is really those emotional ups and downs, right? The psychological piece, to continue to stay in the game, because it's really easy to tap out at one point, for really good reasons sometimes, right? Where you got to pay your bills, right? You got a family or whatever, right?
Ooh, I think, when I look at, I've been really involved. So I live in the Research Triangle part of North Carolina here in the States. And I've been really involved in a lot of incubator sort of, early, not even seed stage companies where they're pitching what their idea is, simplicity of your messaging. And by all means, run that deck by people like me. Run that pitch deck where you're trying to get funding, or you have an idea. Even if you have a product, you have to be able to sell that vision or sell what you're building in really clear and concise terms. And depending on if you're a founder that's, someone more so like you and I, where we're coming from more from a business and less technical, that might be easier for us. If you're pitching something and you're coming from, a CS background, and you're, a developer who's trying to move in and found something, you might be speaking Greek to me. And so that clarification and clarity of your messaging is really, really important. And I see it fail and fall flat over and over and over. And it's the same thing when, you're going into rounds of funding, or you get to the point where you're able to try to be acquired. That how you present yourself is really even more important than what the product you're building actually is, because people work with people they like. So it's got to be clear, it's got to be concise, and you have to be personable.
My dad used to always tell me that George, people do business with people they like, right?
Right.
Over and over. And I remember now he's a psychologist too, and he's worked in corporate psychology. So maybe that's his sort of, you know, perspective, but, it makes total sense. If you were to think about one tip, right?
Hmm.
One specific tip that you wish someone would have told you when you were that first time founder, that was actionable, that you could just implement right away. Any sort of tip that comes to mind? I know there's probably 1,000 of them, right?
All of a sudden, I'm just flashing back like 14 years ago, going, should not have done that. There was that 13 years ago, should not have done that. Whew, loaded one, George. I'm going to put my product hat on.
All
So
right.
had a product hat is going on here. And then I might have a follow-up tip because something else just popped into my mind. You need to build for a collective problem, not for one customer's problem. And I'll give you a real world example of kind of what that means in my past. So we had a very large customer come to us. This is back in social media management days. So Buddy Media, who's since been acquired by
Yeah.
Salesforce, we were competing with Hootsuite, Sprout Social back in the early days. There's
Yeah.
a gazillion of
Vitru.
us. Vitru,
Yeah.
Sprinkler,
I was at
Wildfire.
Kick Apps. I don't know if you
Ah,
remember Kick Apps. Yeah, I was
I
early.
do.
I launched I was an SDR. I was part of the first inside sales team there, New
There
York
you
City.
go. All
Yep.
right. I mean, there was that was the hot thing bubbling,
Yeah,
2007 through like 2012. It was a bloodbath out there.
totally.
Um,
Buddy
but
Media did pretty well, right?
Buddy Media did real well. Yeah, I think he had
Yeah.
a 9x multiplier. I think it was a 350 million
Yeah.
acquisitions. They made apps on Facebook pages. That was pretty
Yeah,
much the
exactly. I thought it was largely a services business.
I think it
Uh,
might have been, but that might be a different podcast.
yeah.
The fallacy of what you actually sell. That's a
Yeah.
different storyline for another day. But back to my mistake that I wish I had not done. Very, very large global CPG came to us. Their social media management platform had been shut down by the VCs that basically were not making any money, and they needed to come on board and did an RFP. Wanted to be onto a new platform within weeks. Which, if anybody knows social media management, it was not easy back in the day to do implementation and onboarding and globalization of kickoffs and things like that. We completely disrupted our roadmap. We were probably 40 customers at this point. So we saw dollar signs, we saw opportunity, and we completely shifted to build what they were asking for, but nobody else wanted. And what that ended up doing over the years, they stayed on with us for quite a while, but over the years, that became sort of a ball and chain
Mm.
that we had to drag along with us that nobody else wanted to adopt. So don't chase dollars just because you see a large dollar sign in front of you. It is a classic mistake. I see it with tons of companies I consult with that they will say, well, our biggest customer. And then my next question to them is, what would happen if that customer left and nobody else wanted it? How much time is it going to take you to build the thing that the customer wants and then maintain the thing that nobody else wants? So I think that's my biggest learning was it's very hard when you're in it and you're just trying to grab every dollar, but you really do, once you're starting to get some market fit, you need to really be thoughtful of building for the many and not building for the one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Erica, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom, and also while you're on vacation. I very much appreciate. I see the turtles back
I've
there
got the
on the wall.
turtles behind me. I've got the water in front of me, and we're just having a chat. It's great.
Awesome. Well, if folks want to maybe connect with you, I know you work with a lot of startups and doing advisorship and also consulting. What would be the best like channels or URLs to reach you?
Sure. You can reach me at ericajenkins.com. And of course, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can get to my LinkedIn profile just searching for Erica Jenkins, or it's linked on my website. So either one, I'm available. Slide into my DMs. I'm more than happy to give a little advice and help.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful vacation. I know I'll be on vacation next week. And so I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, again, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you so much, George. Appreciate it.